Thank you, Helena, for dropping me in it as usual. Helena asked me to do a talk in an email, a very casually worded email, which tends to be the way that Helena's emails are done. And then you find out that suddenly when you arrive, it's actually not quite so casual. I've got two screens, a microphone, and the 5 to 6 bits of advice in 5 to 6 minutes has kind of turned into about 10 minutes, but that's all fine. What I've done, thankfully, is actually done a little bit of work in advance, and what I'll do is quickly just go over a little bit of my background to what I'm about to show, which is that really I've been working now for an awfully long time, longer than I care to remember actually, both actually before computers came in, which is a really long time ago, and obviously with the advent of computers coming on board. I think the one thing that is true of it all and drives all the way through is that one thing hasn't changed, and that is that ideas are the obvious one. That I think if there's one piece of advice I would give you is be good at ideas and have an idea. So that would kind of be the most obvious one, but I kind of decided that I would also canvass opinion and ask a few people, both at Redpath and also just some of the people I know. So what I will try and do is quickly rattle through them. I'm not going to spend huge amounts of time on them because I don't really think it's my place to say too much. So I asked very simply the sort of the top 10 or the top 5, or in fact any just top pieces of advice that people at Redpath have got. And there's some really interesting ones that came up. So I'll start with the most obvious one, which is you have to get faster. And I think that probably if you have done any work placements, you'll understand that. If you haven't done any work placements and you're about to do work placements, the speed in which, if you like, the actual industry works at is, I would argue, getting faster and faster. And I'm not sure that's always such a good thing, but that is the reality of it. So the luxury of briefs that maybe you get given and you get 3 or 4 weeks to work on very rarely happens, sadly, these days. You generally get a lot less time, but that doesn't mean that you have to cut corners. You just have to work a little bit faster. So you have to bear that in mind. Interesting thing to saying there about the little project, which is something that I've experienced a few times, that you've also dropped into these kind of conversations. I think that's actually a really good thing. I think sometimes if you're working on a brief and you've got maybe 3 weeks to do it, you don't have to work on it for 3 weeks. You could actually work on it for a week. Or you could actually work on it for 2 days and then stop and go off and do something else and come back and actually look at what you've done. Because I find that a lot of the time actually your first ideas generally are the ones that you tend to come back to. It's either, this is my experience, the first idea or the last idea. And it's very rarely the ones in the middle. Because the ones in the middle are just you kind of like plodding along, trying to think to yourself, right, I've got to show 3 ideas. So I've got to come up with some more. At the end of the day, the client's only going to go with 1 idea. And they're not paying you to come up with 5 ideas, they're paying you to come up with the idea. So that would be a fairly obvious one. And even 1-day briefs, and I think that's also a really good thing. And sometimes not planning it, just doing it, I think is one thing that you've been teaching, which I think is a very good idea. This may seem a bit an obvious one, but be curious. And I think what I mean by that is I think you have to be curious about design, but you also have to be curious about your clients, and I think you have to be curious about the work that you do, and I think you have to also be curious about just life and day to day, and little things like, it sounds a bit like something from Sports Scotland, but getting off the bus a couple of stops earlier, and not from a health point of view to get to where you're going, but actually just getting off the bus in a different place, or getting lost on a bus. Getting lost is actually really interesting. Sometimes getting on a bus and not knowing where you're going, or getting on a train sometimes, usually not when you're drunk, but when there's something else going on, is actually a really good idea. Or someone said that they look up when they go to work and they look down when they go home, which I thought was a bit odd, but it's quite interesting. I tried it the other day and actually it does work, because you do start to see things that you didn't ever see before, so that's quite curious. And don't apologise. I think probably this applies arguably more to people when they're coming in to do presentations to people, not just for placements, but actually when you graduate and you're looking to get a job. I think it's very easy to kind of say, you know, this was my idea, and it's, you know, it's kind of just about there, but, you know, looking at it now, the type's not quite right, and all you're doing is basically planting seeds of negative doubt in people's heads, And I'm not saying you have to be too gung-ho, but I think you have to be confident that when you go in and you start showing your work, you have to be really confident about the work that you're showing. I think you have to really be proud of what you're showing. And I think it's really important that you actually never, if you can, never apologise too much, because it comes across and it does become very negative. That was something that was taught to me. I did my first presentation and it was bloody awful. And the first thing that the person said at the end was, I really liked your work, but you just apologised the whole time. So I think it's really important that you bear that one in mind. Be flexible. I'll try and expand a bit on this one. As Helena knows, and some of the students I think might know, I'm also involved with the Marketing Society. The Marketing Society have a Student Star Award that we've organised for the last few years, and the point of it is to basically give a brief out to the students, but rather than getting you to respond as in creatively, as in design, as in coming up with visuals, the first round of submission is done as a written submission. And the reason it's done that way is very specific, and that's to try and get designers to be thinking about what it is that their ideas are, and to actually articulate the thoughts and actually write them down. And I think sometimes it's actually very easy as a designer to actually be able to scribble something down or sketch something out, or to even show something and almost hide behind something that looks really cool but actually might not really have much substance to it. I think it's really important that you actually have a little bit more of an idea behind what it is that you're showing. So actually writing something down makes you just stop and think about it, because you've actually, when you present to clients, you've got to actually have thought about the order in which you present, why are you showing the ideas that you're showing. So you have to have an order to it all. But the other reason that we do the Student Star Awards, and it's the Marketing Society, is because the Marketing Society tries to make it a little bit more exposure to marketing in its widest form. So a lot of you, hopefully at the end of this, will go out and you'll actually get jobs as graphic designers, but there may be some people who might not necessarily get a job in the traditional graphic design world. So it might be that you have to diversify. So you might have to think about, well, if I can't do graphic design in its true sense of the word, what can I do? So it might be that you have to just slightly open your eyes a little bit, be a bit more flexible, and actually think about the other types of communication and the other types of marketing that is out there. And I think there are some really interesting roles out there. So just be a bit more open-minded, be a bit more flexible about your expectations at the end of it. This is the one I think I've told Emma a few times. You see Emma wherever she is, so she hello. This one would be a sponge. This is just a personal one for me. Again, it's very much tied into this whole thing about kind of a bit like being curious. It's about basically wherever you go, whatever you do, whatever you try and experience, try and be a bit more open-minded. It may be that your particular passion is, I don't know, gothic and music and thrash metal and all the rest of it, but if you can diversify and open your mind up to different types of music, if you can think beyond the types of books that you would normally read, maybe to even open up a magazine. Sometimes when you're the doctors and you're waiting to go in to see the doctor, it might be that the particular periodical that you like reading isn't there. You might end up reading something else. It might be a Heat magazine or a gossip thing. That's actually quite cool, that's quite good. Because again, at the end of the day, when you are doing what we do, you are dealing with audiences out there of people who've all got very different lives to you. And I think it's important to actually be aware of that. So the kind of music that people listen to, the kind of things that they react to when you're walking around doing shopping, look at the window displays. Why do people go to certain types of shops? Why do they like certain colours of clothes? All of those things are out there. And we need to actually be a bit more soaking that and be a bit more sponge-like. So actually soak it all up and see what comes out of it. This is, again, it's a fairly obvious one, but I think it's really, really important, is if you don't know, don't pretend. And that is massively important, because there's loads of people who go into meetings who sit with the client takes the time to sit down and talk to you about a project. And I've seen it time and time again, people nod their head and they understand, oh yeah, of course, and then at the end of the meeting they come out and say, what the fuck was all that about? And they don't actually, sometimes, in some cases, they don't actually know quite what they're being asked, by which time the client's gone. So in a business situation, that's really embarrassing. So you know, but equally, I think as students, if you're being asked to do something, rather than going off and actually head down and start to come up with loads of ideas, if you don't know, it's a complete waste of time. You're going away for 3 or 4 days working on something, and then you come back and show your work and realise that, actually, yeah, I didn't actually know what was being asked to do. So again, fairly obvious, but I think it's really important that you sometimes a bit more honest. My apologies for this one, this is just the obvious one, but I thought I'd put it in there anyway. Read the brief, and read the brief, and read the brief, and read the brief. When you're working on any project, there is a brief generally that you have to work to, and when you work on your ideas, the most obvious thing to do is when you review your ideas, read the brief, and then look at your ideas. Because quite often you can get carried away, and you can end up going off in a direction because you really like this typeface, or you like this colour palette, or you like these ideas, but actually you sometimes realise that maybe you just got a bit carried away, and actually what you were being asked to do doesn't seem to correlate with actually what the brief was. So that's, I think, quite important. And again, this is a personal one, I think using a pencil. I think, I'm not saying you have to be great at drawing, but I think that a blank sheet of paper and a pencil, you can get loads of ideas down there without having to jump on a computer and spend an hour and a half trying to find the perfect typeface. And then when you found the perfect typeface, and then found the perfect images, which take another 4 hours to find on, whatever picture library sites you're looking at, you can spend a huge amount of time getting everything looking just so, but actually you could have done it a hell of a lot quicker just by scamping out a quick idea and actually discussing that internally. I think it's really important to do that. The classic of that was, quite a long time ago I was working on a project, and one of my designers very helpfully was trying to explain a particular material that he wanted to use, which was called lenticular material. It was basically like the things you get in cereal packets. So it's the little sort of the things that you waggle and the image changes backwards and forwards. And he had got this idea that he wanted to do some signage, but when you went past it, it changed. And that was quite a nice idea, I thought. He spent 8 hours designing it and then doing it in Director and showing me the transgression from one to the other. And, quite interesting, actually, the design was rubbish. And it was a complete waste of time. And he could have quickly sketched that out and actually said, this is what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to do with the site, and that would have worked just as well. So, shortcuts sometimes, get to where you need, but you don't have to spend hours getting. So, that's another one. And I think being organised, I can't underestimate this one enough. I'm not saying you have to be anal to the point of ridiculous, but I do think that you have to be very organised. I think it's really important that, particularly when you are thinking about going to speak to people, when you are sending out your CVs, when you are sending out emails to clients, spell properly. That's really important if you can. When you send out an email to people, sometimes not to necessarily include an entire list of about another 8 or 12 agencies that you're also speaking to. And then to also, I've had loads of them. I've had, Dear Ian, it was really great to speak to you. I'd love to work in Navy Blue. And, that's just a waste of time. So they'll go straight in the bin. And I'm not being funny, and maybe that's being impatient on my part, but I don't really have the time to kind of deal with that. People haven't got the time to spend thinking about why they're actually speaking to you and have a genuine reason. It's just a blanket email. That doesn't really work. And being organised also when you're a designer, I think is really important, because you have to, at times, you have to just go back and reference back against what you agreed with the client, what the client said, and actually that can become a very expensive mistake. Because it can become, well, you said this, no I didn't, and it can cost lots of money. So if you have things written down, if you can be a bit more organised, down to things like the way that you might actually organise your desktops or your hard drives and things like that. I think it's really important. Not massive, but I think it's quite important. And the final one really is don't give up. And I think that is very, very difficult for a lot of you, because if you are still studying and you are soon to be thinking about going out into the big bad world and trying to find a job, it's pretty scary. I've had experiences speaking to a couple of previous students that I work with who have spoken to me about, what do you think, maybe I should go for this? In fact, I was speaking about them just before this just now, and my advice was, there was one job that a particular student was thinking of going for, but you could just tell that that heart wasn't in it. And I said, I don't think that's do you want to do that? I said, well, I'm not sure. And I think it's just being sometimes honest about it and saying, just because someone offers you something doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right job. It might not be maybe where your dream is, or it not be where your heart is. So I think it's really important to actually be honest about it, but don't give up. Because you will get there. If you're good, you'll get there. This was just something another guy, that when I did a little bit of research, a guy called Frank Chamirov wrote, and I just thought he had some really lovely stuff as well. He's got lots of great bits of information, far more articulate than I can ever be. But at the very end of it he says, basically be suspicious of lists and advice and lists of advice. And that's probably the most important thing. So, thank you very much.